Welcome back to News You Can Trust. I'm Nina McLaughlin.
And I'm Jason Savage. We want to take this opportunity to thank you for coming back to episode 2 of News You Can Trust, and we'd like to invite you to take a moment to share this edition of News You Can Trust with your friends and family.
So this past Tuesday, we had quite a big event up here in Augusta. It was Governor LePage's annual State of the State address, and it went really well, I think.
Yeah, you know, it was hailed by the media and people across the aisle as maintaining Governor LePage's hard-hitting message, but doing it in a softer way, sort of reaching across the aisle more.
Yeah, some of the big things he covered was, we always hear him saying, do no harm, but a lot of people still don't understand what the concept of do no harm is. So what he explained through a lot of his address was that do no harm is essentially the referendums were passed by the people. He respects the will of the people, but at the same time, most of these people who voted for these referendums didn't read the 30 pages of the bill itself and get the full extent of what would happen when it was passed through. So when it was passed through, a lot of people realized that these were actually doing harm to a lot of Mainers.
Yeah, the legislature itself, Congress, sometimes they pass laws that have unintended consequences, and what we heard from Governor LePage in the State of the State was, you know, what those very real consequences are going to be. One thing that he pointed out was that 10% of taxpayers in the state of Maine pay about 2/3 of the income taxes already. The increase in the income taxes is really something that's very likely to drive some of those people who have more income elsewhere. Our income taxes among the highest in the country at that rate. The other thing that he pointed out, and I know that a lot of restaurant workers out there are organizing on this, is that the way that the tip credit and the minimum wage referendum was passed, really we have a situation with 358,000 Mainers on fixed incomes aren't going to see a raise, but their prices are going to go up. And then we have restaurant workers who the tip credit part of that is hurting them. So those are all things when Governor LePage is talking about doing no harm. He's thinking about those restaurant workers and the people on fixed incomes and on everybody. If a large exodus of wealthy people leaves the state, then we're all going to be left to pay the bill.
Exactly. And another thing that he really focused on is the harm that's being done. It's not only to servers and people on fixed incomes, but it's also to the, fixed incomes, a lot of these people, it's to the elderly and the disabled, whether it's, he did reference mentally disabled individuals who are going to have maybe a harder time finding a job if they're being paid, $13 an hour to do the same thing that they were doing before, $8 an hour. People are going to look for more skilled workers.
You know, I had the experience of working with Governor LePage before he was ever the governor, and he was a big supporter, and still is, of programs that help people who face developmental disabilities to actually get a job. And by putting an additional wage price on there, it's making it harder for people who really need to get that entry-level position under their belt, start getting some job skills, and then move up. And those are things that I know that a lot of the people who supported these referendums, they were doing it with the best interest. But what we heard from Governor LePage at the State of the State was a real empathetic plea for those people who really are in the weakest position to defend themselves.
Mm-hmm. And with the elderly, he was talking about, it's been in the news a lot lately, some folks whose homes have been taken back by the towns because they owed $4,000 in back taxes, and he is really sympathetic towards these individuals, and how can we help the aging Maine population? Yeah,
that's another area where I know from personal experience the governor has great empathy, and it's part of State of the State addresses to have individuals there who are affected by the policies that are in place or being discussed, and it was nice to see that not only were we talking about that issue in the State of the State, but that the director of the VA, the Maine Veterans Affairs department, had helped this couple, and not only had gone to bat for them, but had helped the retired veteran to get, I think it was about $1,200 in income that he was qualified for. That's really something that gets lost in all of this is when the LePage administration or anybody else is out there doing the hard work to make sure veterans and other people get the help that they earned.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't always get covered, and I think it's fantastic that he highlighted some of the great work he's doing for elderly Mainers, Mainers with disabilities, and also people who have substance abuse issues. He covered that a little bit in his State of the State address, that the Maine DEA seized, was it 8 pounds of heroin?
Yeah, I think they
and
said...
they had 2 guns, 8 pounds of heroin, and I think a significant amount of cash.
Yeah, I think they said it was the largest drug bust in Maine history. And you know, that's an issue that really we see in Augusta. A lot of people on both sides of the aisle want to work on making that better. In the past, it's become a political football a little bit, but you know, what we heard at the State of the State was Governor LePage actually talking about Senator Troy Jackson, who's a Democrat, and how they're working together on a pilot program, and they're working together on this issue. And you know, I find it interesting that a lot of people like to complain that people are not working together and things like that in the legislature or the governor, and then there's all this pushback about when they get together to do something, sometimes from unusual places. But you know, we think that's important to highlight that Governor LePage is working with Senator Jackson and other Democrats on the drug issue. It's very, very important.
And I think he mentioned him several times, thanking him for just his efforts to work together. And like you said, a lot of people, when we see politics and we see it in the news, and you like to think that it's just people poking each other with sticks all the time. And you know, it's not like that all the time, and we're especially lucky because we live in Maine and we live in a place where it's a small state, and if you're not working with someone, then your mother's going to see him at the grocery store, and she's going to come up to them and say, well, why weren't you working with my son on this piece of legislation? But you know, after the State of the State address, the Blaine House, we had Republicans were there, Democrats were there, everyone was talking, everyone had a nice time, and it's not this crazy partisan divide that I think that the media is trying to make you think that it is. And I think that, you know, ultimately we're going to get more done together as a state than we are if we just keep playing this party line politics that so many people are trying to get everybody to play.
We're happy to stand down on the political back and forth on those policy issues if people are working together and we're going to get something done. So we're happy to see that. You know, at the end of the State of the State, or near the end, I think it was, Governor LePage also talked about a couple of accomplishments that I think it's important for us to highlight because it kind of shows where the state has come. The first thing he pointed out was that with the help of the legislature, has built the rainy day fund to $123 million. That's important because when Governor LePage inherited the state budget, it was a horrible wreck, and there really was nothing there. The other thing that's really important, and this really affects every single person in the state, is that the structural deficit, which is the difference between what the government is committed to spend in the budget and what it has for revenues when they start the budget process, was over $1 billion. It was $1.2 billion. And Governor LePage now, with the various budgets and programs he's implemented, now has it down to $165 million. That is a big league reduction in the budget, the structural deficit. And we were talking about this just a little while ago. No governor since the 1970s has left his successor with a surplus. It looks like Governor LePage is on track to do that.
I think he is, and I'm excited to see what it gets to in the next 2 years even. I think we're going to see some more dramatic improvements.
Yeah, you know, he's looking at reducing the income tax, and we've seen in the past when that happens, we see a revenue increase, and if the legislature can work together, do no harm, and try to help people with, you know, keeping more of their paychecks, we could see big results.
Yeah.
Lastly, we'd like to tell you that if you want to watch the governor's State of the State address, or if you want to read his budget, you can go to MaineGOP.com/SOTS2017. MaineGOP.com SOTS 2017 stands for State of the State 2017, and we have a lot of information and resources there for you.
Definitely check it out. So Jason, more things about the federal government. We saw this past summer, we saw the federal government sort of overreaching and making the Northwoods Monument, taking a parcel of land and essentially making it a federal property, which I think was inappropriate, especially when so many communities spoke out against it. I think now we're starting to see some of the effects that happen when the government overreaches and turns land into federal land.
Yeah, last week on News You Can Trust we discussed how Congressman Poliquin and Senator King were working to free up some area around Acadia National Park for natural resource industries, and this week we're seeing that in our News You Can Trust that Congressman Poliquin is working to free up some land that's in Old Town that's forbidden to be used as anything except an airport, and he has to introduce federal legislation to do that. It's more of the same work.
It's just bizarre that the United States government has a parcel of land that they basically gave to the town, but it's only to be used to build an airport. But you can't do anything else with it, only an airport. And I find that's just so bizarre. Congressman Poliquin wants to have businesses come in, and he wants to look into maybe giving them some sort of a tax benefit if they buy these parcels and they bring their business into Old Town, maybe help revive the area a little bit. But essentially the federal government says it has to be an airport.
It's just the idea that a bunch of bureaucrats in offices in D.C. know better than the people in Old Town is absurd, and Congressman Poliquin's fighting that fight. A lot of people like to try to drag him into every, the political flavor of the day on every issue, but he's out there actually doing the work.
Another thing, though, that's great is, again, we have Maine setting an example where he's reached out to Senator Collins and Senator King to ask for their assistance in the U.S. Senate and pushing to have this land essentially freed up for development.
Yeah, anything that can happen that brings our delegation in line to work to help Mainers have more jobs and better paychecks is a great benefit. And it's nice to see them working together and to see Congressman Poliquin continuing that laser focus on jobs.
I think it's fantastic. So let's talk about something where people aren't working together.
You must be talking about the Trump the cabinet nominations.
No, not at all. That's going fantastic because they're all holding hands and passing things through very quickly.
Great big kumbaya moment in the United States Senate. So it's interesting to see how things are going down. President Trump continues to work to advance his nominations for his cabinet positions, and there's some rancor and fighting, and some of the Senate Democrats doing literally anything they can, it seems, to try to stop these. But he's continuing to move forward. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos was confirmed, and then immediately following that, they moved on to Senator Jeff Sessions, and Senator Elizabeth Warren took to the podium to launch an attack.
Yep.
And they had to vote actually to silence or shut down Senator Warren's attack on Senator Sessions, and Senator Collins was there to vote in favor of Senator Sessions and to hold Senator Warren accountable. And this is the type of thing that is so far out of line that it really needs to be brought out into the daylight and shown. It's one thing to have a difference of opinion about a nominee for a cabinet position. It's another one to go to the floor of the Senate and impugn people's motives and character, which is what happened. I'm happy to see that a member of the Senate from Maine was there to take that fight up and hold Senator Warren accountable. Mm-hmm. Another interesting thing that is going on as far as the Trump administration, things have been quiet on a few fronts here, but we received a poll this morning. It's a liberal leaning poll from Morning Consult and Politico. And what they did was they polled the executive orders of President Trump since he became president.
There's been a few.
Yeah. Two of the more popular ones, or the two most popular ones, are his executive order to eliminate federal funds for sanctuary cities and the immigration travel executive order. They're both at 55% approval, which is interesting given the news coverage.
and this is, I think, part of the issue that a lot of mainstream media or left-leaning media, which is most of it probably usually, hasn't quite seen yet, is that they can rail against this all as much as they want. And we have these incredibly liberal politicians like Senator Warren who will rail against it. You have rallies and you have protests, but ultimately President Trump was voted into office by people who you don't know who they are. They're your neighbors. They're, the guy down the street who's fed up. It's people who aren't going to come out, and they don't have time to protest. They made time. They went and they voted. And ultimately, they voted him in because he's fulfilling all the promises that he said he would do on his campaign. He's doing every single thing he said he would do. And I'm not surprised that these are so popular. And I am a little surprised that people actually took the poll, because usually these people aren't really poll takers, but these are popular.
It's probably 4 or 5% higher from the people who don't trust the media enough to take the poll.
Yeah.
One thing I just say, and I'd be interested in getting some viewer feedback from this. So what I see a lot on the TV and internet coverage of these protests of the travel order and the wall is I see protesters running around with no borders, no wall signs, and I wonder, does the average voter see those things and think that it's a good idea not to have borders or not to have walls? And you have to suspect at some point that the overblown backlash from the left, because they need something to be upset about, is backfiring on them.
Yeah, I think everything is backfiring on them. I think everything is backfiring on the left right now, and he's passing through the things he said he'd do, and he didn't get voted in. He didn't win the presidency because no one came and voted for him. He has a ton of support. He has massive support, and just because people don't see it doesn't mean it's not there.
Some people just don't show up and protest. One other thing I think...
It's because they're working.
They're working for a living. Another thing to point out is that we just saw news that Sappi is going to invest $165 million in their Skowhegan mill. It's more good news on Maine jobs, and it was announced by Governor LePage. One of the other things that Governor LePage has focused on for the entirety of his term is energy costs, and it's a big focus here too. That a big thing to do is to make sure that energy costs stay low, and that's something that the average person can reach out to their legislator and tell them that it's important to keep energy costs down, to support jobs, especially with some of these big manufacturers and companies that really are large consumers of energy.
Yeah, it is something he talks about frequently in his town halls, which I highly suggest that if you're watching this, if you've never been to the governor's town hall, definitely go if he's ever near you. They're very informative. You can ask a question, and you'll learn all about things like keeping energy costs low and efficient energy for Maine. I think it's very informative. I've been to quite a few, and every time I go, I learn something new.
Yes, yeah. Well, with that, I think we're going to wrap up this week's version of News You Can Trust. This video will go out to you in an email with a whole bunch of news links. We hope you take the time to read through all of those and reach out to us if you have any questions or comments.
And as Jason said last time, we know we're not reporters, but you can trust us.